Hello, 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 listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cultvault podcast. I'm your host, Kacey, and joining me today is a special guest, Cynane Shay. Hi, Cynane.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. This is so exciting.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation, which we were supposed to have a few days ago, but I completely missed the interview. So we're making up for it today, and thank you so much for giving me extra time. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure, yes. I'm very glad we could put this together. I am American. I think maybe you can tell by my accent. And I currently live in South Carolina, so the Bible Belt, but I am from Florida, which is its own special kind of flavor of awfulness. I grew up in a fundamentalist evangelical Christian household community. It was very insulated. We went to a private Christian school for elementary and middle school. We went to non-denominational churches growing up, and then also with some Southern Baptist churches. And when I was in college, I went to one that was kind of a little bit more Pentecostally, lots of different Bible camps and summer camps. And I definitely got a lot of different flavors, but all evangelical. Like Catholics were not real Christians and they were all going to hell. I remember asking my mom once when I don't know how old I was, like maybe 8 to 12. Like I had kind of just found out about other denominations. And at the private Christian school that we went to, I think we were probably learning about like Christian history, and they were talking about the different splits of Jonathan Edwards and all the different like historical figures and how there were the people who believe that you're elect. What are they? Oh, Calvinists and all these people. And I remember asking my mom and I was like, what about like Presbyterians? Are they real Christians? What about Episcopalians? Are they real Christians? And like kind of went down this little list. And I distinctly remember her just being like, well, I don't really know. It doesn't matter because we're the right kind and that's all that matters. And so, yeah, never met anybody outside of the community, never met somebody who wasn't a Christian, never met somebody who wasn't a Republican. And then I went to the University of Florida. I got to go to a secular university, which was not normal because my family did value education, and that was not necessarily normal either. And I was good at school to the point where it was exceptional enough that I had more opportunities than a lot of people that I grew up with, which is very sad. And after I graduated, I did nuclear engineering. I now live in South Carolina and I contract for the Navy in the nuclear propulsion training program. And that's generally my...
In a nutshell, that is Cynane's background, but there are lots of other themes to pull out of that summary, and that includes a lot of stuff that is prevalent to what has happened in the States regarding the election results over the last week or so. Before we dive into all of that stuff and talk about rabbit holes and conspiracy theories and wild tales from beyond the kind of right winged space, you mentioned that your family held education in high regard. Is this because of your parents? Were they like second or third generation evangelicals, or did they find their own way together into religion, or at least evangelicalism, and then did that then play a role in how they perceive the importance of education?
Yeah, so it's a little bit hard because I don't know their history very deeply. I know that I think they were both raised in Christian homes. I don't know to what extent, how often they went to church or like what denomination they grew up in, but I think generally evangelical. But I do know that it was after they had children that they got more serious about it. I think it was always there, but they, really turned into it as, one, they got older, and two, that like they had kids. And they, on the scale of like white Christian nationalism, I say that my family was more, I mean, they were all three. They were white supremacist, Christian, evangelical extremists, and obviously nationalists, but you can definitely kind of be one more than the other. And I think that my family was a little bit more white nationalist than evangelical, just by comparison to the other families that I grew up around, because a lot of the families that I grew up around were extremely fundamentalist, involved in the IBLP cult. They were sending all of their daughters to IBLP summer camps. A couple families didn't believe in birth control, doing the whole quiverful thing. So I saw the very, very extreme end of like the evangelical extremist mindset, which my family, like, they gravitated towards. They put us into a private Christian school because they wanted us not to be influenced by secular education, and they wanted us to be good little white Christian nationalists. But they were, I think, maybe even more interested in like the political conspiracy theories and the racism. And for my mom, especially recent events, I think that she was a woman, so there was an element of cognitive dissonance around the misogyny in evangelicalism that I don't think she consciously realized, but it was absolutely an influence for her. She was a firefighter, in a time when women were not firefighters, and she had life experience outside of like the church. A lot of my friends' parents, like, they grew up in the church, they got married in the church, they had kids in the church, and like they never left like the small town that they lived in. My mom, I think, had a little bit more of a traumatic background with her family, and then left when she was 17 or 18 years old, lived on her own for many years, had abusive relationships, had friends with abusive relationships. She saw the reality of like what can happen to women. And so she had enough of an outside perspective to value education and to value independence. And I call her kind of an accidental feminist, because she definitely still bought into like the Christian patriarchal social order of the man is the head of the household, he's the spiritual head, he is the everything head, and that I should find my like, special God husband. But at the same time, a man can always leave you, and you need to have something to fall back on for yourself. So there was a lot of mixed messaging from both the community and from my family. My family was not a part of IBLP. They were only loosely aware of what was going on in like the schools and the churches that they were sending us to. And so I got just enough of an opportunity to kind of eventually find my way out.
Do you have any idea of how your parents slowly moved more into the kind of conservative fundamentalist space? Was it like through church services or mutual friends or reading materials that maybe somebody in the house had picked up? I'm always really interested in how kind of liberal, just to kind of use that word for this purpose, liberal becomes more conservative in terms of like religiosity. Because usually you find that with age, it oftentimes goes actually the other direction.
Yeah. So My family was never readers. I don't remember my parents ever really reading books. My dad would maybe occasionally read some like war fiction stuff, but my mom has had a couple books and they were all absolutely insane, like rapture theory, like prophecy, whatever. I've seen like one or two of those books in the house, but they were not the sort of people that were like consuming Dobson literature or, you know, a lot of the different Christian publication. There's like an entire industry of it. I'm sure that there was some of that, but it wasn't like a ton. I think that they went to church. We went every Sunday. Sometimes the kids, me and my brother, would go multiple times a week because we would have youth group and like other things. My parents, we went every Sunday. And I think that that was like a big thing for them. The in-person services, the community, and just sort of the culture of it. And I think that they got a lot more serious about it when they had kids, but then they got more fundamentalist as we got older. So it was a slow progression, and I think that that's very reflective of larger American culture, because I grew up in the 1990s, like in the 2000s, when there was this rise in Christian alt culture. In the 1990s, evangelical Christianity made up 30% of the United States population. That is it's insane. It's insane. 30% of all of Americans. And that is exactly like when I was born, at the peak of this. And they made an entire ecosystem so that you could be entirely separated from the rest of the world. They had James Dobson focus on the family. They had the Christian television shows, the Veggie Tales, instead of Batman, you had Bible Man, like all of this material, and that was largely focused to children. And then, you know, they had a lot of the publications and the books and the sermons and things that were targeted towards adults. And I think that even without them actively searching out and like reading all of these books or, you know, being as directly involved as like some of my IBLP friends' parents were, it was the culture. They didn't have to really seek it out, and they didn't have to really know where it was coming from. They picked it up on Sunday services. They picked it up in their friend groups. It was very social, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And as we got older, like my mom got worse. She became really obsessed and attached to the idea of the rapture and end times. And I think that was kind of some sort of coping mechanism for her to be special and to have this idea of ultimate justice being eventually served, and like that she's one of the good guys and she gets to, to be special. And then, you know, the fear mongering and the conspiracy theories got worse with all of that. We used to be allowed to do Halloween. And then by the time I was in middle and high school, they tried to say we weren't allowed to do Halloween anymore. And then again, it was just very reflective of larger cultural historical shifts, because at the same time, we were going through the Obama presidencies and all of the political conspiracy theories and the tension around all of that at the same time. And it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation of like, I don't know which fed into which, but they definitely like went with the stream.
Yeah. It's like a compounding of all of these things coming together at the same time and creating, a counterculture movement. People talk about the 1960s, 70s counterculture movement as like a really rose-tinted glasses period in history, without thinking about all of the stuff that came with illicit drug taking and free love and the rise of underground criminality, which kind of flooded the streets of places like San Francisco. There's this very kind of poetic reflection on the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s. And I definitely think that there is like a raw and powerful kind of aesthetic behind looking at those periods in history. But what we're seeing now with, I don't want to keep saying right wing, but what we're seeing now with lots of different groups like the Proud Boys and like the billionaire boys like Elon Musk and, like figures like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson, along with things like QAnon, wild conspiracy theories. We saw it kind of all come together on January 6th almost. But this kind of compounding of all of these people coming together at the same time alongside Christian nationalism, it's like wild that all of these things are just all here right now. And they've all merged together into this one sort of massive counterculture movement, which is really strange to think about. But you've mentioned the IBLP a number of times, the Institute for Basic Life Principles, which was started by Bill Gothard, who I believe had like a very popular prison ministries and prison sermons. So he would go in and he would kind of like proselytize to people in prison. So that was a way of recruitment, like mass recruitment. And one of the schools, the summer schools that you've mentioned, where kids would be sent off for weeks at a time for what I would call mass indoctrination. And then I think kind of like the third major popular kind of spoke in the wheel was the home education programs that Bill Gothard had generated. So you kind of keep mentioning your IBLP friends as like people that did IBLP stuff that you didn't take part in. So I just wondered if you could talk us through your experiences of the IBLP, whether kind of you were a part of it or not. And then if you weren't, what did your school years look like before university?
Yeah, sure. So I think that I'm in like a really weird position because I was surrounded by IBLP, at least influences, and saw it, but my family was not a part of it. And it's a very strange position to be in and it definitely affected me even without having to be in it, which I think is kind of one of the key things to take away from this, because like you don't have to be involved directly for this stuff to be harmful. And if you are involved directly, like God help you. The IBLP, I remember seeing like Bill Gothard VHS sermon tapes for anybody who remembers what a VHS is. And I just remember, everybody loved the 19 Kids and Counting show, the Duggar family. They were these like Christian heroes, like fighting the Hollywood elite by being like Christian celebrities and like showing the world, like basically like feeding into the persecution complex of like, they're defying the world by like showing whatever. And I want to say 12 when my best friend was going to an IBLP summer camp. I didn't know what it was. It was just another Bible summer camp. The only camps or places we ever went were like church related. So this was like not unusual. And she invited me, asked if I wanted to go. And I was like, okay, like what is it? And she described it as a girls only camp. And the dress code was that you had to wear floor length skirts. You couldn't wear pants, like even if you were covered, like you had to wear floor length skirts. And you got to learn how to cook and clean and sew. And I was 12 years old, and I'm very for learning how to cook and clean and sew. I at least like cooking and sewing. Not going to wear a floor length skirt. I went to a private Christian school that had a dress code that I hated. And I was like, I'm also from Florida. So I imagine that everywhere is 105 degrees at all times. The camp was like probably in like Michigan or something where it was actually cold, but like I didn't understand that. And I was like, no, thank you. And my mom asked if I wanted to go. because my friend, I'll call her Kathy, she wasn't the only one. There were probably like 6 to 10 to 12 girls that I knew, and it's a very small town, so that's essentially everyone. The private Christian school that I went to, there were, I want to say, at least 3 girls going from there. There was probably 4 or more girls going from the youth group at the Southern Baptist Church that I went to. So a lot of people. And my mom asked if I wanted to go because all of my friends were going. And I said, no. And her only response was, okay, good. Because I don't think she didn't understand what exactly we were being taught in the environments that they were putting us in. But she was not a part of IBLP like on purpose. But though I was still invited to Bible studies where we were using IBLP material or, similar awful Christian influencer material. Those moms, the ones who were wearing floor-length skirts and didn't believe in birth control, were the moms who were running our vacation Bible schools and who were teaching our sermons to the kids. They were trying to teach us how to pray in tongues at like 12 years old, which was very stress-inducing. They were the ones who were teaching in our youth groups like all the way through high school, them and their husbands, who were forcing purity culture on us, and not just purity culture, but like IBLP level purity culture, which is extremely extreme. Women have to control like what they're wearing, no more than 2 finger widths below the collarbone, floor-length skirts, can't even wear pants sometimes, can't show your shoulders. I had one youth pastor tell us that if we had a Facebook, this was back when like Facebook was like kind of okay, that girls should only like have their profile picture be like a close-up of their iris, of their eye, because like literally even your face was too vain and sexual and prideful, and you should basically never feel pretty, so I grew up around this. I was taught inside my home and in these communities that was correct. Purity culture was still correct. My sexual education included what I'm pretty sure was like an audio book of James Dobson that my mom locked me in a room and forced me to listen to over like 2 or 3 days. And the takeaway was essentially that sexual sin is equivalent to spiritual sin, and that if you engage in any kind of sexual sin, you are permanently damaging your soul in a way that cannot be undone. And what counted as sexual sin was then left entirely vague so that there was always room for shame and guilt. Prolonged eye contact could be considered sinful, or you're flirting, you're tempting a man, you're leading them astray, you're cheating on your future husband by even having a crush. So all of this stuff was just in the water. It was everywhere, even if I didn't go to the IBLP camps. So
yeah. I mean, eyes can be sexy. I think eyes can be really sexy. So, I mean, even it could be seen as dangerous to have a picture of your eye as your profile picture.
Forget ankles. Eyes are in.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There's some people, I say this a lot, but there was a subreddit I read once, a post and it was like in the ex-Christian kind of realm, and I can't remember specifically, but there was a thread on really weird kinks that people have because of purity culture, because of how they were raised. And some people were like, I can't get enough of ankles and I can't get enough of collarbones. And it was just really interesting to read how people have responded to their kind of sexual oppression. And it's just kind of made it more heightened, which I imagine is quite quite typical if you are told, and I said this in another episode, it's like a big red button, you know, and you're told not to push the big red button, and you're like, but I want to know what happens if I do touch the big red button. And I am infuriated listening to all of these rules and restrictions that are put solely on girls and women, and these expectations and shame, fear, and guilt that are put on women, because I'm sure that there are men that are implicated or abusive that are not told that, you know, part of their soul is permanently damaged, and actually if they just stay with God, they'll be absolutely fine.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much that is so deeply wrong with purity culture, but that is genuinely awful because it, one, attracts predators because you have an imbalanced power system and they see the opportunity for manipulating that. And then I genuinely think that it creates abusers and predators, because I think it was in the Shiny Happy People documentary, one of the men, like, this hurts men as well as women. Like, it's designed to hurt women, but it hurts both. And they're talking about Josh Duggar, and they, you know, it's like, don't think about your sister's boobs. Don't think about your sister's boobs. Don't think about your sister's boobs. Like, what are you going to think about? You're going to think about your sister's boobs. And so, like, it creates, you know, the obsession, the absolute focus and I cannot tell you how many purity sermons I have sat through in my life. Once you hit a certain age, and that is far too young, every single youth group setting is about purity and sex. And when they split you up, boys and girls, I don't know what happens on the boys' side, but on the girls' side, it is every single one of them, multiple times a week for your entire, like, middle and high school life. You are talking about sex and purity and shame. And that obsession with sex is still an obsession with sex. Like, even though, you know, it's an obsession with the suppression of it, like, you're still constantly focusing and talking on it and making it like a much bigger thing than it is. So it's not at all surprising that we have an abuse problem of both children and women in the church, in the Catholic Church, in the Evangelical Church. Like, we are making this, you know?
Yeah. In most faith-based settings, I would argue, because of the nature of misogyny and patriarchy, and how, you know, that is designed to really subjugate women. So if that power imbalance is existing in Christian spaces and other major religious spaces and minor religious spaces and other faith-based settings, then I would argue that it is being exploited and is harmful in all pockets of society all around the world. What happened when you went to university? Did you know what you wanted to do when you went off to college? Did you know which college you wanted to go to? And how did things start to shift and change for you at that point?
I always knew that, like, I was supposed to go to college. I didn't really know what that meant. And I didn't know what I wanted to go to college for. It was just that, well, I'm good at math and I don't have a maternal bone in my body. So I was like, not interested in medical. Thank you. I need there to be a 0% chance that I have to sponge bathe anybody. And, you know, so engineering was an option. I didn't know what engineering was. Didn't know anybody who, like, really did it. It is pretty vague. And I went into college as a freshman for nuclear engineering, and just because the internet said that there would be a lot of jobs. And I had watched too many 90s movies and thought that I would go to college and discover myself and switch my major and find my path in life and, like, whatever. But I sort of accidentally graduated, stayed in nuclear engineering. It's where I am. And then, I mean, the goal was always just to get a job. And, you know, my parents valued education, but they valued education for its practical uses, and I mean, that's the reality that we live in. a lot of education is just to be able to provide for yourself, for your family, to have a stable life. And that's, what my parents wanted for me. And, I think that they were very right. And I very much appreciate them like putting me on that path. Do not value education in general for self-improvement, for development, for, they would not have sent me to college for a degree that they did not approve of. Like if I had said that I wanted to get a degree in psychology or sociology or anthropology or any of the soft sciences or literature or, anything that wasn't something that I could immediately make money with, they would not have sent me to school. Or I would have had to take on a lot more like loans and stuff. But so when I came out of all of this, I remained fully indoctrinated through all of undergrad. A lot of people, they go to college, they explore, they learn, they meet new people and different experiences, and like they break out of that. That was not me, as much as I regret that. I came from a bubble, and I went to less of a bubble, and it was a lot to sort out, and I did not take full advantage of that. I lived all 4 years with my roommate in college who was from my hometown. We went to the private Christian school together. We grew up together. So she was the same as me. And we sort of like stayed in our little huddle. And the first 2 years of college, like we found a church, and our social circle was the youth group at this church. And we kept ourselves in the bubble. And then the next 2 years, junior and senior year of undergrad, my degree became much more intense. And I started taking the nuclear specific engineering courses. And as you may imagine, nuclear engineering, not a large major. So it was a very small class. And my social circle kind of shifted to that. And so this was really kind of the first time that I was introduced to a full social environment that was not secular people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this was the first time. And even then, a couple of them were Christians. And so but I had the first hint of, oh, they're not evil. They're not monsters. They're just regular people. Yeah. And then, and I saw stuff people I saw some people do some drugs and things and
debauchery, just a bit of general debauchery, really.
Yes. And I mean, I didn't drink until I turned 21, but when I turned 21, I did drink because my family was not one of the absolute teetotaler families, and I was well, it's legal. So I drank and I went to parties and things, but, some of the stuff was still really out there for me. Knowing people who did drugs was oh my God, they're going to die. And then, so it was a little bit of, outside of the bubble, but I was still fully indoctrinated. It did not shake the core of my beliefs. I had a lot of guilt about should I be going to bars? Is this allowed? If my friend's going to a bar and then tries to leave with somebody and they're going to have premarital sex, how can I, go and be a part of that? To even just go to the bar with them. It was a lot of time and energy wasted on guilt and worry. And then it wasn't until the pandemic that I actually shifted out of my beliefs at all. When I came out of college, I went into the program that I work in now, and it was a very, especially the last 2 years of college were very intense and very hard. And then the program that I went straight into was very intense and very hard. And so for the Trump presidency, the first Trump presidency, I was able to / kind of had to like keep my head under the sand. I was just like working all the time and wasn't really aware of what was going on. I was never politically active or really like followed politics or knew what was going on anyway. I was old enough to vote for Trump and Hillary, but I didn't vote because my whole family was pro-Trump. But the grab him by the pussy comment was fresh for the 2016 election. And to me, as a girl raised in purity culture, that was horrifying. I could not fathom what was happening. Like the amount of hypocrisy in the people that raised me to like not be able to show my shoulders to then go and vote for this man was very, very concerning. So I couldn't vote for Trump, but then I also couldn't vote for Hillary because I was told that she was literally a demon, which is awful. And I am so sorry. But, not for any real reason. Did not know anything about her or her politics or anything. It was just...
She steals babies. That's one of the big ones, isn't it? She steals babies and drinks baby blood.
Well, that came a little bit later.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just letting you know what in case you didn't know, there are some things out there. That's why you don't vote for Hillary.
Yes. So could not vote for Hillary either. So I kind of sat that one out. I didn't really pay attention during the first Trump presidency. My parents got like increasingly more obsessed and like rabid about it. And like at that point I started to get very concerned. Like they were joining in like Trump boat parades, and like we're from Florida. They had never like gone to political rallies or anything before that I could remember. And so I didn't understand like why that was happening. Over the years, I had kind of picked up on conspiracy theories, but didn't know to call them that. My parents were very, very racist with Obama. My mother was convinced that he was secretly a Muslim and that he was purposefully infiltrating American government to turn us into like an Islamic state. It was awful. Thought that there was some like Fukushima conspiracy theories, not politically based, really, just like about the reactor accident that happened in Japan in like 2011. They were like talking about conspiracy theories about how we were moving into like a nuclear famine because the radiation was like melting the fish and like contaminating all of the cows in the United States. And I was like, that's literally not happening. Literally in school for nuclear engineering. Thanks for asking. My parents like were obsessed with the rapture. So they did a lot of like doomsday prepping. Not like it's very subjective because like some people do a lot of doomsday prepping. My family, like, they had a crap load of guns and they had apocalypse seeds, which was just like a 5-gallon bucket of corn seeds so that they could like farm the land when like Obama, declared himself to be like the communist overlord. And those things I knew were wrong. It was so out there and ridiculous. And I wasn't like a child. I was in high school and older at this point. So I was like, that's wrong and weird. And they were probably just like old people. And they don't know how the internet works. And this is an internet literacy problem. I never connected it to this is an evangelical problem or that this isn't fringe, that this is affecting more than just like my random redneck Florida family. And so it wasn't until the end of the Trump presidency and then the 2020 nightmare that really everything turned completely upside down. Very, very rapidly. And there was a couple things that happened within quick succession. And again, very just reflective of larger historical societal movements that were happening. In early 2020, we had COVID. And then in the middle of 2020, we had the pastel QAnon uprising. And then at the end of 2020, we had the voter fraud allegations. And each one of those kind of hit me in succession like they did the rest of the world. So with COVID, I was considered an essential worker. I was still going into work every day. Everybody in my hometown started posting a bunch of like conspiracy theories. And it was coming from my mom. It was coming from my best friend, Kathy, her friends, her parents, every single person in my hometown, like every single person, like people that you don't even talk to, like, you know, my friend's aunt or my second grade teacher or like, my pastor, my pastor's wife, like whatever, my friend's pastor, like just the core and the periphery, everyone.
Right.
And they were, you know, sharing stuff about how COVID was a hoax or how it was, you know, released on purpose, or how face masks are slavery or face masks are child abuse, or, you know, the vaccine was obviously not out at this time, but they were like sharing a bunch of stuff that, like, you know, it's a government control scheme, it's a population control scheme, like all this stuff. And my friend Kathy, she came and visited in July of 2020. And at this point, I was only loosely aware of that all this was going on. I didn't go on Facebook very often. I caught like a couple weird things. But again, I just thought like, oh, it's like weird old people. They don't know how the internet works. Like, this is just like normal. But my friend Kathy came and she stayed with us for a day or two because she was like traveling to North Carolina and she needed a place to stay. And she was annoyed that we weren't going places. She was annoyed that we weren't going out to like restaurants and things, even though it was like the first big summer spike. She said that was the first time she'd ever worn a face mask. She was like, oh, we don't wear face masks in Florida. She made fun of me and my now husband for taking the pandemic at all seriously. And when I went to undergrad, she had lived in Taiwan and taught English through an IBLP program. So, you know, you were talking about like the prison ministry and the homeschooling programs. Like, he had a lot of different stuff going on. And some of them were international, like usually like English teaching programs and things. So she taught English in Taiwan through an IBLP program. And her best friend from that experience was posting like some of the most crazy stuff that I had seen. And we talked about it while Kathy was visiting. And she was like not bothered. She was like, oh, you don't believe in any conspiracy theories? And I was like, I do not know how to answer that question. Was there a second shooter? I don't know. Like, what are you talking about? And just kind of like let it go. Because, and again, it's very hard to talk about all of this in hindsight because we know what it means now. We know the language. We know like where this was heading. But at the time, this was the first that I had ever like, you know, dipped my toe into any of this. And so I just like let it go, moved on, like tried to live my life. And then the day after she left, she sent me a voice message. She was like, oh, because we'd been talking about conspiracy theories, I thought you would think that this is interesting. My other best friend from the Pentecostal church that she went to in our hometown believes that when the COVID vaccine comes out, it's going to be full of secret metal, and the metal in your blood is then going to interact with 5G radiation in order to control your mind, to either make you vote Democrat or kill you. She wasn't sure which one. I at first thought that this was like funny. I was like, oh my God, that's so funny. Like, your friend found this like online, you know, like some crazy internet thing. And she was like, no. Like, she believes this. And at this point I was aghast, just appalled. You know, I told her, I was like, well, you need to reconsider all of your life choices for tolerating the existence of this person, let alone being friends with them. And if anybody other than you says the word radiation to you, or anyone other than me says the word radiation to you, you need to slap them and walk away. Yeah. Like, what are you doing? And she, again, just was like not fazed. She's like, oh, I don't know, I think that's a little bit harsh. And I was like, I don't think it is. At this point, I finally started paying attention because Kathy was my age. Like, she was not a boomer who doesn't know how to use the internet. Like, she was like me. And I started looking at Facebook and seeing all of these posts, and my mom started sending them to me with like Simone Gold, who really pushed the hydroxychloroquine conspiracy theory and was tied to doctors, I'm using air quotes, who taught people that disease is not caused by germs and viruses, but caused by having sex with demons in your sleep. Like,
oh gosh,
these were the people who were pushing hydroxychloroquine and then later ivermectin. But, you know, so I'm getting these videos sent to me. My other friends are sending me, their parents are sending me videos talking about George Soros and Bill Gates. And everybody's very concerned about like pedophilia. And I didn't understand like what any of this had to do with each other. And it was, that happened in July. It was August. So I guess it was pretty quick. It was August when my friend sent me an article about QAnon. And she was like, and she came from the same community as I did. She's the only person that I know that made it out like with me.
oh my gosh, you needed that person, because there must come a point where if it's coming at you from all angles, you know, like you said, directly and peripherally, there must come a point where you're like, it has to be me.
Yeah.
I am the outlier here. So maybe I am the one that needs to start considering things from another perspective. And we've seen a lot of how video algorithms and aggressive social media algorithms really help these conspiracy theories and these spaces to grow, because they force people almost down a rabbit hole without the viewer even really understanding what's happening to them. But I've never really considered how somebody, you know, enters this conspiratorial space through mutual pressure from, you know, just everyone around you, physically and virtually. Everybody's talking about the same stuff. People are sending you things. People are like, read this. What do you think? Watch this video. Tell me your thoughts. I don't have time to watch it. Have you watched that video yet? Like, I have not really considered what it would be like for somebody to have all of this stuff thrown at them, to feel like they're kind of like pressured, like almost peer pressured into reading things, watching things, and then all of a sudden think, well, actually, that does make a little bit of sense. You know, a lot of these conspiracy theories are littered with small truths that make it almost like you could start considering the other parts of the conspiracy theory that don't sound realistic. Maybe they could also be realistic. I've never thought about it from that way before, but I'm so glad that you had one other person that was kind of on the same track as you, so you could be like, hang on a minute, stick with me so we don't lose each other in the crowd, because we need to keep our arms linked and come out of the other side somehow.
Yeah, though that's exactly what happened. So I had I had a couple of friends from undergrad who didn't grow up in my community, so I do know some sane people, but really not that many that I grew up with. So my friend that I grew up with, she actually deconstructed way before I did, and sort of distanced herself, and until we were always friends, but I can see now that she had distanced herself and why she did that, because her experience growing up was a lot different than mine, and that she came from a single mom household, and she was openly discriminated against in the Christian circles that we were raised in. So she had a lot, she saw it a lot sooner, and worked through that a lot sooner. So she sent me an article that was like, oh my God, QAnon, this is what's happening. And so at that point, I went down the rabbit hole. I tried to figure out what this is. Why is it that everybody is falling for this? If I can understand it, maybe I can talk to people about it. Now, unfortunately, all of this coincided exactly with when my now husband proposed to me, because Kathy came to visit, and then the next weekend he proposed. One of the things I was the most excited about in the wedding process was to have my bridesmaids, because I had my friends from back home, but then I also had friends from undergrad. people live all over the country, and so you don't get to see people very often. So I asked all my bridesmaids to be bridesmaids right away. Kathy was like we didn't do best man maid of honor, but Kathy was like the unofficial maid of honor because she was my best friend. There were 2 other girls from my hometown, and then my friend who also escaped from my hometown. And so we had just had this awkward interaction with Kathy, but I was like, it's fine. Like, it's a phase she's going through. Like, it's just like a weird internet thing. So we asked her to be a bridesmaid, and then continued to watch as she and everyone else devolved and got worse. And now I know to call it QAnon, and I know like kind of where it's coming from. I, again, being in engineering, am surrounded by nerds. And so I was at least loosely aware of like what 4chan was, and then 8chan. Right. And the people that I grew up with in my hometown, they don't even know what Reddit is. For them, like, it's very difficult to understand like where this stuff is coming from. Like, not only do you have to explain like what QAnon is, but you have to explain like what Reddit is. So it's very difficult for them to like relate to, and they can't see how they're connected to it. But I figured out what QAnon was, and then I went to all of my hometown bridesmaids, and I was like, okay, this is what's happening. With Kathy, I was like, oh my God, it's QAnon. This is what, your Taiwan IBLP friend is talking about. This is why she's so obsessed with pedophilia, and like, what does that have to do with Donald Trump? Like, whatever. They think that I have a screenshot of a text message where I literally say like, oh my God, like they think Hillary Clinton is eating babies. LOL. It all comes full circle. And she gave me like 1-line responses, would not engage. At one point she was like, I've been to Cambodia. Like, I can't believe you don't believe in child sex trafficking. And that is not what happened. Trafficking.
Oh, that is such an infuriating statement on so many levels.
Oh my God. For the recording, human trafficking, child trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, all very, very real, very serious problems. Was not denying that was the case. I was denying that there are tunnels full of mole children that Donald Trump is trying to save. So it was QAnon. She was like hard-pilled into it. There was no talking her out of it. So I went to my other friends from back home, and I was like, I need to pre-warn them about this because they're going to start to see it. I do not understand why at this point, like, all of the evangelicals are the ones that are falling for this, like statistically head over heels. And that is our entire hometown. So I was like, you're going to start to see this. You need to know what it is so that you don't fall for it. And my one bridesmaid had already been seeing a bunch of stuff. She was concerned about the Wayfair child sex trafficking conspiracy theory that like Wayfair was shipping kids in cabinets. Not happening. And she was worried that like Oprah Winfrey was a pedophile based on a video that she had seen. And I had her send me her information. I watched it. I was like, no, not from this video. And she listened. And this is the thing, is that like, she listened. I think that she generally trusted me, but I was the only person in her entire world who was saying no. Like, the same thing that was happening to me was happening to her. Her sister-in-law, her mother-in-law, her mother, they were all sending her these videos. And her, her husband, they were all anti-vax. That's a lot of social pressure for somebody who isn't necessarily as stubborn as me. And it was too much. And she wasn't spreading the misinformation in the way that like other people were, but she was scared by it and didn't know what to do with it. And so she just didn't do anything with it, as in she like didn't get vaccinated. And then my other bridesmaid, who is the only one that I still have any kind of contact with, she listened. And she was like, oh, I already know all about this, because her aunt, who is, again, a woman that I've known my entire life, had gone hard-pilled. her family couldn't get her off the computer. She was like doing her own research every day. She had told my bridesmaid that all of the hurricanes that hit Florida in 2020 were man-made by Jewish space lasers with the intent of sinking the state of Florida because DeSantis had given them too much freedom, and I guess the Jews didn't like that. Like, just the most insane thing that I had ever heard in my life, coming from a person that I know. It was very, very, it was a slap in the face. It was rabid anti-Semitism, like right there. And, that bridesmaid, she didn't believe it. She was like, oh yeah, like my aunt's gone crazy, like that sort of thing. But she could not / would not see the connection to herself or to the anti-vax conspiracy theories or to anything that like directly affected her. I'm not a part of it. I don't know what 8chan is, so I'm not a part of QAnon. And they couldn't see any kind of connection. So, and they were just like, oh, it's just like Cynane with her like nerdy internet, whatever. And so we got through the wedding, and my parents were my dad has one lung. He's a cancer survivor. He's like over 60 years old. He's the definition of high risk. They were stockpiling hydroxychloroquine. They were, gosh. I didn't find out until last Christmas that they had been taking ivermectin. They were maybe sometimes wearing face masks. They were not really social distancing. There was nothing that I could do. I don't live in the same state as them anymore. They were not listening to me. I talked to my brother because he like lives with them, and I thought maybe he could like help. And he was worse than either of my parents. He told me that we should just let the weak die.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like just absolute, like an awful, awful thing to say. Especially like when our father is the weak. We're not sure if we were going to, and like also all this is like while we're trying to plan a wedding. Also, I don't actually know what's happening at the time. I'm still learning about QAnon like as we're going through this.
Yeah, you don't need your wedding to be a political rally. You don't need that at all. You said we got through the wedding. Like, that's not how people should talk about, like, the most amazing day of their lives, where they bring all of their loved ones together to celebrate their love for each other. Like, we got through our wedding.
Yeah. Well, I'm not really sure we did, because we timed the wedding by kind of just like by coincidence at the lowest point of Delta before Omicron had taken off, and we thought that the vaccines were like 98% effective at the time, so we felt comfortable having a wedding. It was all outdoors. Like, we were tracking all of the numbers like religiously, like trying to make sure that this was like, not something stupid. 95% of the guests were vaccinated, just voluntarily. So we didn't feel the need to like require it for attendance. But I did tell my parents that they had to get vaccinated because my dad is so high risk. I was like, I could not live with myself if you are the only people there who are going to be over 30 years old. Like none of my like aunts or uncles like really attended. And I was like, you have to be vaccinated. And my mom told me to cancel the wedding rather than her get vaccinated. Gosh. And she at one point tried to have the wedding in the Miami Trump Tower, which is like just such an insane thing to say out loud. I had actually, this is like so strange, like I think I actually blacked that out. Like that happened, and then I forgot about it for like 3 months, and then I remembered that she had tried to host it in the Trump Tower. And then, like it was awful. There was a thing with my bridal shower where my mom tried to convince my like 83-year-old aunt to come to the shower without, she was not vaccinated because of like autoimmune issues. And I had told my mom, I was like, we just need to make sure that everybody is at least tested before the shower then. And she said, basically like one of her friends like did not want to get tested. And so she tried to convince my 83-year-old aunt to come to my bridal shower anyway. Instead of just telling her friend like, oh, I'm sorry, then you can't come. let's put my great aunt's life at risk. I told my mom, I was like, I will burn the city to the ground before I let this woman come to my bridal shower untested. Like, I'm not even like asking that they get vaccinated. Like, I'm asking you to get tested because my 83-year-old aunt is going to be there. And I was called a bridezilla and a control freak and basically like an authoritarian dictator. So yeah, we got through the wedding and I was just worried. My husband's family, sane, normal. He has no frame of reference for any of this. He was not raised evangelical. I was just worried that instead of like, what color are the spoons and like, how are we folding the napkins? I was worried that somebody was going to start talking about Jewish space lasers to my in-laws. So it was not pleasant. And then I basically just kind of got through the wedding. It was in October. Don't burn every bridge. Don't overreact. I must be wrong. I must not understand what's going on. I essentially was being gaslit by reality and everybody that I knew. And then, I had just enough time to decompress. We went to see my husband's family for Christmas. They had a new house. They had a new baby. It was this beautiful Christmas, and I'm having a full-blown minty bee. Kathy posted some like crazy shit about like anti-vax and like Biden is trying to murder us all kind of stuff. And I snapped. I felt a physical snap. I don't know how to explain it, where I deconstructed. Like in that moment, I had been trying so hard not to destroy all of the relationships in my life and not to burn down all of the bridges in my life, only to then like look around and realize that they had been burnt, but just like from the other side. There was nothing left to salvage. Those people were not a part of my life anymore. And I, at that moment, I would not have said like, oh, I don't believe in God anymore. Like, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. The indoctrination broke to the point where I, at that point, was then able to start reflecting on what I actually believed. And it was very much if they can be wrong about this, if they can be wrong about so much, when they have portrayed this worldview and belief system and themselves to be a moral authority and to be like, God's message and convoy to the world, and they can be this wrong, what else are they wrong about? And the answer was everything. But
yeah, and a bit more.
Yeah. And then it took me about a year, which is super fun for the first year of marriage, to like get my feet back under me. I did not at that moment have the language of deconstruction or evangelical or spiritual trauma, any of that. I eventually found it on social media. And so like social media obviously is a huge part of the problem in all of this, the algorithms and the online radicalization. But it also was extremely helpful for me in this capacity, where I was able to find people going through the same thing, find resources. I started reading compulsively as soon as I had like a slight direction. And I really kind of started from the perspective of the conspiracy theories, because I was like, I need to understand why they are eating ivermectin. Why? And it was from that angle that it dismantled my entire belief system and everything that like I believed as well. Like it was not just like conspiracy theories. It was not just political. Like they fell for these conspiracy theories because they were evangelical. And the Bible verse of you will know false prophets by their fruit. And you can see like what the fruit was. And it was like literally insane. And, I read books like American Conspiracy Theories by Cynane Shay and Parent. Suspicious Minds by Rob Brotherton, a couple others like about conspiracy theories and like the psychology behind like why people fall for these things and like how they are searching for just like very human things, like very relatable, normal things. They are trying to fill social and psychological needs, compensatory control of, you know, the world is scary and chaotic and I don't know what to do with that. So I'm going to, I believe that I have this great ally. Like I believe in a God in order to put order to existence. The other side of that is you can do the same thing with a great enemy. So like a Satan or a global cabal. Like, why are wars happening? Why are bad things happening in the world? Well, it must be that there is some single entity that I can blame and then I can understand it. And it's an oversimplification. It means that you have to do less work to understand the world that you live in, and that you get to put yourself on the good side of whatever your imagined battle is. And, you know, there's all sorts of these like sociological tests on, you know, what makes somebody believe in conspiracy theories, like who are these people? They talk a lot about it like it is a personality trait and the conspiratorial mindset, and how you are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories when you are searching for order, if you're put into a disorganized room, even if you are in a state of stress, or even that like people who believe in conspiracy theories are statistically more likely to join a conspiracy. So it's, you know, all of these biases that we have a bias of believing that if I like something, I'm more likely to think that you will also like it, that other people will like it. So if I think a dress is attractive, I think that you would also probably think that it's attractive. So if I am willing to perform a conspiracy, I'm more likely to believe that other people would also join in on a conspiracy. And so like when we say that like every accusation is a confession, that's like there's actually like sociological data that backs that up. And all of that, why people believe conspiracy theories, like what it is, like what void or hole or like anxiety they are trying to calm, is the same as cults, and like why people join cults and why people fall for cults. And, you know, if you're in a moment of change or emotional turmoil, or, you know, if you are searching for an oversimplified solution to whatever existential problem it is that you are searching for a solution for. And it wasn't until I found the books on like cult psychology that it really kind of put the puzzle pieces together. And at the same time, I'm reading a bunch of books about the history of white Christian nationalism in the United States, and Tim LaHaye and Jerry Falwell, and, you know, the Dobson dynasty, and how this whole movement was birthed out of pro-segregation causes, and how we have Christian private schools and Christian homeschooling because people didn't want to send their kids to integrated schools, set up the whole Moral Majority and Christian Coalition and Council for National Policy and all of these like political lobby groups, and Focus on the Family has one, I forget what it's called, again, out of trying to keep schools from being integrated. And how, you know, again, we're supposed to be this great, you know, perfect message from God to the world, and we've been on the wrong side of history forever. And for me, you know, it was all of this at the same time, finally realizing like, oh, I was raised in a cult. Like, not, you know, when you use that word, obviously this is a cult podcast, and everybody has, all the different experts have like different definitions for how they use that word, which I totally understand. But for me, what has made the most sense was one, Margaret Singer and Janja Lalich's term of social and psychological control programs, because it is both social and psychological. And I think that that really gets it to the heart of why people believe conspiracy theories as well. But then Robert J. Lifton's kind of language of totalistic ideologies, where a destructive cult is a charismatic leader, a transcendent belief system, a system of control, and a system of influence. And they center the veneration of a totalistic ideology or this absolute worldview on a charismatic leader. But in my experience, what I went through, I would not say that it meets that definition. We didn't have the central charismatic figure like Bill Gothard and IBLP necessarily, but we did have, you can still have the totalistic ideology without the central charismatic figure. And I think that that gets into like what we are seeing in the United States right now with the white Christian nationalism and the Trump presidency and like what political totalitarianism is. But it's very scary because the systems of control that I essentially have spent the last 4 years trying to escape, I really, I escaped too late, because now those systems of control are the systems of control. And they've moved into like positions of extreme political power. But all of this was 4 years kind of in the come down, very, very, I reached a point of, and I think that this is what a lot of people like have to reach, is an overwhelming cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy, to the point where it broke the indoctrination. And then when I went through all of the research and all of the reading and, trying to actually understand this, it gave me something to do. And it gave me a lot of peace and a lot of, like something to do about it. And then
a chance to be like proactive instead of just sitting around wondering or being confused about why everything's kind of falling apart.
And it's a very tumultuous time, and it leaves a lot of people open to other predatory systems. Like, cult hopping is very popular, or like, I've seen people who went through something very similar to me, but I didn't know that that's what was happening like years ago, who then fell into like substance abuse and like other things, because it's extremely difficult, and you lose your identity of like who you are, and you have to build back an entire worldview from nothing. And what Robert J. Lifton talks about in his definition of brainwashing is much more it's a very like socially stigmatized like term now, but he talks about like it involves violence. It involves like physical coercion, like you're a domestic abuse victim, you're a prisoner of war. Whereas like thought reform is much more voluntary, like you were recruited into the Moonies and you kind of chose to adopt this belief system. And when you're a victim of childhood indoctrination, like from birth, it is much more similar to brainwashing, where you are physically coerced. They control your movement and your food and your social circles. And when you have to break that kind of indoctrination, they say that, let's say you join the Moonies, you adopt this absolute worldview and absorb their language, their thought patterns, how they dress. Like you adopt a new personality, a cult persona. And if you are lucky enough to break out of that cult, you revert back to your original personality, your original worldview. But somebody who is indoctrinated from birth, you don't have an original worldview, and there's nothing to resort back to. And so you have to build from the ground up and like also dig out everything that was wrong. I believed until I was almost 30 that women had one more rib than men did, because Adam, God made Eve out of the rib of Adam. Just little things like that even is like absolutely insane. And then on top of all of that internal work and building a new worldview and all of this that's happening, you lose your entire social network as well, because the community cost, the family cost. With the second Trump election, just 2 or 3 days ago, I have officially gone no contact with my mother.
Wow.
I spent many years like trying to break through to her, and like she watched the Shiny Happy People documentary recently, and she seemingly had made some progress on things, had apologized for sending us to the white Christian nationalist school growing up, acknowledged that when I said that it was indoctrination, and she acknowledged all of that. And then when the election came, she still voted for Trump because she was stuck between the rock and the hard place of her entire identity and social network and the cognitive dissonance that I was forcing on her. And for a lot of people, it is too much to be able to overcome. And
it reached a fever pitch as well, in the weeks leading up to the election. Some of the conspiracy theories and some of the rhetoric and things flying around, it was just absolutely at a fever pitch as well. So I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to have those conversations typically with your parents, but to try and speak to your mum in these last few months, when I imagine it was front and center of a lot of people's entire lives, existences, like was focused on the run up to the election. And the run up to the election just lasted forever as well. Like it was just every day. It was just like, gosh, even over here, I was like, please, let's talk about anything else. And social media has been like a giant dumpster fire of like people on the left, people on the right hurling abuse at one another. But there's been so much stuff in what you've said that has been so relevant in conversations that I've had just recently. Like you talked about how, cults have like they have a veneration for somebody in the center that they kind of like hold a kind of like god status, and like Trump was elected into that position by people. He didn't start this movement like Bill Gothard started the IBLP, but he was kind of put up on that pedestal, and he's definitely like not avoiding that either. He's definitely like playing into that, and he's really enjoying like being given this god complex that I'm sure he had already, and it's just being bolstered, in my opinion, by this kind of movement that we've seen over the last few years. But even yesterday, when I was talking to Dr. Warren Hearn, who is an abortion specialist in Boulder, Colorado, he was talking about how conspiracy theories are easier for people who are, have a lifetime of religion to at, because they've believed unbelievable stories for hundreds and hundreds of years. He said Christians have believed unbelievable things since not the dawn of time, but if you ask some Christians, then the dawn of time. And that made a lot of sense. He said it's probably easier for people that have believed these things from the Bible to believe conspiracy theories, when us outside of that space might not fall into that as much. But then, of course, you've got a lot of non-religious people in that kind of counterculture space at the moment as well. And everything to do with segregation and desegregation and, setting up schools so that white people don't integrate with African Americans or Black people. And that is just, a classic example of Lifton's dispensing of existence, choosing who has the right to exist and who doesn't have the right to exist. And at the moment, with everything surrounding Trump, whether that is far right extremist groups like Christian nationalists, or whether that's the Proud Boys, or whichever kind of Trump space that we're looking at, you can find the dispensing of existence with anybody that wanted to vote for Kamala Harris, for anybody that is against gun laws, for anybody that is pro-trans, anything like that. You see a lot of dispensing of existence and saying like, these people don't have the right to exist, these people shouldn't exist, which is wild. It's a wild time out there. And I am so sorry that you've had to go no contact with your mum, because it's just such an impossible thing to try and break through with her and have those conversations and try and get people to see things from the other side. It's it's rabid online at the moment. Some of the really uncomfortable, disgusting, misogynistic, abusive language that are coming out of some of the more male-dominated spaces on social media about how women don't have rights and about how women's bodies belong to men, and, about how women can expect to just be sexually violated and assaulted going forward because now Trump's back in power. It's just so gross and uncomfortable and horrible. And that's a scary mindset for me to look at, even over here in England, where we do have our worrisome spaces, but it doesn't seem to be as much of a fever pitch here at the moment as it does over in the States. But, these things have a ripple effect, and we have Christian nationalism on the rise over here. We have Christian fundamentalism on the rise over here. It's not like I'm looking at America and saying, oh, look at them people over there. They've got it so much worse than we have, or they're so different to we are, because I just don't think that that's true. And I don't know where you go from here and what you do next, but I know that you're in the middle of writing a book, and that kind of goes through all of this stuff that we've touched on today.
Yeah, it's been slow going because I'm not a writer and I'm not a historian. And so it's something that is taking me a long time, but I am absolutely still working on it and very slowly making progress. And it's also just like a little bit difficult because things like keep happening, and like I'm still having to like process like everything that's with my family recently. I did not, as I said, have a lot of the language immediately when I deconstructed, and I, if anything, would like to be a stepping stone to get people to that point faster. If you were going through something similar, and I know that millions of people have gone through something similar with the conspiracy theories, to not feel like you're the crazy one, because you're not. If you're not the one taking ivermectin, then you're not the crazy one. And a lot of people have talked about the history of white Christian nationalism and like how we kind of got to this point. And I think that history is not nearly wide enough disseminated. Like everybody needs to, be educated on this. But even in those discussions, like Preparing for War by Bradley Onishi and Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Gomez-Dumas and The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby, and like all of these incredible, important books, I find that the discussion of the conspiracy theories it's just sort of it's a footnote, and this has happened, and like, oh, it's kind of tied to Christian nationalism, but like it has ruined people's lives. It has broken thousands of families, and we're not talking about that enough, I don't think, and the toll that it has taken, and like that it is indicative of these bigger things. The crux of what I really want to talk about is that these people fell for these conspiracy theories because of their belief system. That white evangelicals fell for these conspiracy theories because they were white evangelicals. We need to look at what is wrong with that worldview, or else we will never fix. If you're arguing with your uncle about Jewish space lasers and lizard people, that's not going to fit. You're working at the top, and you need to work at the bottom. And for me, what snapped the indoctrination for me, and so what I hope would work on other people, is to address the underlying principles of white Christian nationalism. To me, are biblical inerrancy and the fundamentalist theology that is a modern American invention. This is not. I was told my entire life that this biblical inerrancy, biblical literalism, the rapture, all of these ideologies went back to the founding of the church, and they don't. And then the other part of it is American exceptionalism, and that is the white nationalist element of this. And we in America, and even in public school, are taught a propagandized version of American history. And we are not God's special chosen little boys because, we are built on slavery and internment camps and Native American boarding schools and all sorts of horrific things. When you view the world through a totalistic ideology like evangelicalism, which is synonymous with white Christian nationalism now, you form what Lifton and Lawlich have different terms: personal closure, bounded choice. You view the world through a very specific lens, one very specific perspective, and you remove part of reality as impossible. And so whatever's left, however improbable it must seem, has to be the truth. And so when you are conditioned to believe in the church that everything boils down to absolute good and absolute evil, God and Satan, if you are inside the church, then you are good. If you are outside the church, then you are the most depraved. There is no middle ground. It is either you are a good white Christian patriarchal person or you are eating babies. There's zero gray area. When you view the world with that sort of absolutist mindset, conspiracy theories become a way of just explaining phenomenon and events through that totalistic perspective. And we should not be surprised. And I hear all the time, as your last guest talked about, that they've been conditioned to believe crazy things. They believe in talking snakes and talking donkeys, and from the dawn of time, they've been believing these insane things. It's not just that they believe crazy things so they'll believe anything crazy. They believe things that align with their absolute worldview. You don't see a bunch of Christians who are more likely to be Bigfoot believers just because they believe crazy things. But they are more likely to believe in QAnon and voter fraud and anti-vax stuff because it aligns with their inherent bias of racism and misogyny and this cultic in-group, out-group, absolute good, absolute bad belief system. And obviously, it's not everything in the world boils down to white Christian nationalism. There's many different philosophies, and we have the tech billionaires, and we have the manosphere, and we have lots of other cultural influences, but they also tie in pretty well with white Christian nationalism. So we're not crazy, and things are rough, and get vaccinated. So
it's a scary time, and I think it's really hard not to kind of get into a doom spiral or an existential dread. When I was talking to Dr. Hearn yesterday, I was saying I need to leave this episode on a hopeful note, otherwise I feel like I'm going to be spending the rest of the day feeling like there's no point in doing anything because we're doomed, And he was like, well, I've got nothing hopeful for you, what I see all day, every day, I'm 86 years old, and I was like, but I'm 31, you're close to retiring. I've got a decent, chunk of work life left in me. I don't want to just leave and then just, what's the point in anything if that's how you. So it was really stressful. And I was thinking, what do we do next? But, it's scary to think about what could happen, especially if you go off of what the Trump administration has promised to implement or the roads that they've said they'll go down. That is scary. You could hypothesize all day about what they might do that they haven't even spoken about. I don't think that is that's not going to serve anybody. I think that's just going to add to the existential dread and the fear and the kind of doomed mindset. I think we can have discussions about things that have been promised in rallies and talks, and what policies have been mentioned that will be, or what legislations will be amended, but also take those with a pinch of salt, because 4 years in the grand scheme of things is not very long. I think we have to really wait and see what happens. And it's hard for me not to fall down that, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so scared for all the women and all the girls. And I'm so scared for, any marginalized minority group. I'm worried about all of the human and civil rights that we've, fought to progress around the world, just, being like, retracted. I think those things are really scary, but also I don't think that we can sit here and just, be in a doomed mindset all day, every day. So writing about things in the way that you're doing in your book, I think is excellent. A really good way to be proactive, and a place to put all of that angst and fear, because at the moment it feels like there isn't really anywhere to put it. And if we're talking to each other, we're maybe bolstering each other's fear and concern. But then if you're trying to talk to people that don't align with your views, then you're like banging your head against a wall. So it's a really strange place to be at the moment, and it is scary. And my heart has been with all of my loved ones and so many others in America this week. But there isn't a finished book yet, but there will be. We will keep our eyes and ears peeled for news on when that happens. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us when you have news or an update on that. And until then, there is a website, takingoffthethinfoilhat.com, which made me do a double take when I first logged on and looked at the caption, which says how lizard people and space lasers dismantled my Christian worldview. So straight to the point on what the website is doing. And it kind of has a lot of resources. It's got a lot of different books and things that are other episodes that you've been on, other podcast episodes. I was just saying before we hit record that I listened to your talk with Rachel Bernstein on indoctrination, and your video on YouTube with Mark Torrender from Talk Beliefs. And we love Mark over at the Cultvault podcast. So there's loads of things on the website for people to kind of dive into whilst we're waiting for an update on the book.
Thank you so much for plugging that. The resource page on the website is very important to me, and what I would love the most to share, until my book comes out. I need to update it, but it pretty much has every book that I have read in my deconstruction. They're categorized, and everybody can feel free to DM me on Instagram if maybe I can. There are other amazing resources like Recovering from Religion and other websites that are very similar. But if you're looking for a book rec or something, I probably have one, and I would like to maybe try to end on a point of hope. It's pretty bleak. I absolutely am terrified knowing the history of white Christian nationalism, knowing the history of fascism, and what it is that we're up against, and what realistically it will look like at the end of 4 years of a Trump presidency, and how hard it will be to come back from. However, I've been thinking about this a lot, because if we don't find something positive, I'm going to lose it. Two things. One is that I am new-ishly deconstructed, and I think that there is still some residual fundamentalism and also an element of privilege in expecting the world to be just. And the Black community, especially in the United States, has been fighting the same fight for centuries now, and they have been up against much worse odds, and they have been up against much worse violence, and even much worse majority groupthink. And, I am very grateful to finally be on the correct side of that. It has always been this way, we see it better now. And the other point of hope that I have, and this is me like just manifesting this into reality, is that the statistics in the United States, I can't speak for England, is that the church is in massive decline. And it has been linearly and potentially exponentially in the most recent years. The statistics of how many people are in the church in general, who are Christian in general, and especially in the Protestant evangelical church, is rapidly declining. The percentage of people who are nuns or reply nun to religion is rapidly increasing. And the first Trump presidency accelerated that. It's partly why I got out. And a second Trump presidency will also massively accelerate that. And so my hope is that there is just a lag time in the effect that will have. We live in a Christian hegemony, Christian normative culture. And as that decline continues, I hope and trust that we will start to see some effects.
Yeah. And I think that is, it's a sensible piece of hopeful sentiment, because it's not like a conspiratorial. It's not far-fetched. It's not major. It's not like making a huge kind of guess at what's going to happen. It's a very small and sensible piece of hopeful sentiment that I think will help if people carry it with them, because we have enough of big loud voices making big loud promises that will probably never actually happen. That's definitely over here as well, with the vote that we just had and the election that we just had over here. Fortunately, it was my party that won. The fallout from that has not been pleasant, but I was really hoping that people that I kind of like are in my echo chamber, so this is a huge bias of mine, got to feel that same feeling that I had this year, because this was the first year that I've been able to vote where my vote went the way that I wanted it to. So I hope that there is a time where, I wasn't doing this work so much during the Biden election, but I'm sure that was the same kind of feeling. And I hope that we are able to get back to that at some point. That's not if Elon Musk ends up running the world before the next election comes around. It's a strange thing to say, but stranger things have happened, so we'll have to wait and see. But thank you so much, Cynane, for your time. Thank you for rearranging with me, for talking us through your experiences of religion growing up, the rabbit holes and the pitfalls of QAnon, how you were able to keep yourself safe and sane throughout all of that, and how you are proactively dismantling your experiences and your belief system and being so publicly open with those experiences. And I think just listening to you talk and how informed and educated you are, and how much self-teaching you've done by going out and researching, about cults and about fascism and about how history is almost repeating itself with the election results. I think it's a very hopeful message in itself that, 4 years ago, you didn't know, so much or any of this stuff. And now you speak about it so eloquently and so professionally, and obviously from such a learned place. I think that's hopeful for other people who are maybe thinking, I can't leave. I've been here for a lifetime. Like, where would I even begin? Like, it would take me so long to even understand what's happened to me and what I've experienced and what I believe and what the church believes, and how to separate those two things, and what you keep and what you leave behind, friendship wise, theology wise, political beliefs wise. I think you as an individual are a very positive kind of role model for showing how far you can come in such a short amount of time. I'm going to use you as an individual as the hopeful message for the end of this episode.
Incredibly kind words. Thank you so much. And podcasts like this and platforms like this and your message and the work that you do saved me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynane, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too.
Take care. Bye, bye, bye.